Hey, Clemson family, let's talk about the last few position groups that we haven't talked about leading into the season. Offensive line, running backs, and quarterbacks. Should be able to hit those pretty simply. I think there's a lot that we already know about those three groups.
I'm Daniel Shirley. We'll also talk about two of the biggest games on the schedule, or maybe the two biggest rivalries, UNC and USC. We'll see how those games are going to play out for the Tigers.
A lot of question marks on both those teams. I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to the Reign Supreme All-Way podcast. This is season 2. Should be our final preseason episode. Maybe the ACC powers that be will select some realignment before we post this. If so, we will have jumped in already with a emergency edition of this podcast. And then the next one we'll get into week 1. It'll be officially a part of the season with the Duke preview. You can catch the rest of our preseason archives at clemsonkickoff.com. The other position groups we've talked about, the other opponent previews we have looked at. Catch us on social media, the top 3 or 4 sites. We are at Clemson Kickoff. You should be able to search that and track us down there. So let's get into the remaining groups on offense, and we'll start with the offensive line, where 4 out of 5 guys return. And the last spot seems to not yet have been fully decided.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that. I thought that we would get a depth chart and we'd have a starting 5. I was looking forward to seeing who those 5 were, but it doesn't seem like that they're set there. So that'll be, to me, one of the interesting parts about Monday night. And okay, the offense, who knows who's going to get the ball first, right? Duke or Clemson. But when that Clemson offense runs out on the field, who are those 5 guys? Or who is that 5th guy? I think it's going to be a really interesting part because it felt like they were kind of set there, but maybe not so much.
Yep, Tristan Lee or Colin Sadler, both the co-starters at left tackle. Otherwise, things are looking pretty good. You've got Will Putnam manning the center again. You've got Walker Parks and, fortunately, Marcus Tate back. And then you've got Blake Miller out at right tackle.
Yeah, I feel really good about this group this year. Maybe probably more so than last year, and definitely more so than 2 years ago. 2 years ago, it was a work in progress every week, and you didn't know who was going to start. It didn't feel like at most of the positions. I mean, there were a couple of that you did, but it was
a lot of injuries, though, and a lot of close talent calls, even at that.
Yeah, but that year was, I felt like since Dabo's, when he's been the head coach, that was the most, I won't say the worst offensive line they've had, but that was the most turmoil they've had on the offensive line. And it feels like that's not the case now. Again, you said it, 4 of the 5 starters are set, and there's a lot of veteran play there. There's a lot of guys who've played a lot of games. There's some up and coming guys, and you mentioned a couple of them as well. But it feels like there's 7, 8, 9 guys, and there's more depth this year. Now, we were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier. Dabo has said that the last couple of years too, and the coaches have said that the last couple of years too, and then it hasn't played out that way. I hope that's not the case this year, because I think that's a huge part of what this team could be this year. Consistency on the offensive line and some depth on the offensive line. That's going to be really important.
Pardon me. I think they've got to rotate more guys in. I've talked about this in the offseason to keep that starting 5 fresh. You've got to have guys, first of all, Mitchell Mays, you should be able to count on more, thank goodness, because he got that experience that he needed, much like Marcus Tate a year ahead of him. You've got Dietrich Pennington finally in playing shape. Pardon me, hopefully more ready to contribute. You've got Ian Reed possibly as a freshman able to come in. You've got plenty of guys across that line who should be able to get in there and go. Good reports on Ryan Linthicum at center this year. Trenton Howard also at backup center, another possibility. Make it happen. That's going to be the bottom line. And I know that the Tigers tend to want to pick starters and ride them pretty much at every position, but I think at offensive line, they've got to work that rotation and more, get those younger guys more reps so that you don't have something like where Mitchell Mays had to be called into service last year, where Marcus Tate had to be called into service the year before. Give them a chance to be ready when their name is called like that. I think also when you look at the running backs, let's segue over to those guys, known quantities. And again, I want to see more rotation. I want to see more Phil Mafah this year. I have not been quiet about that. I really think that they are more of a 50-50 deal like James Davis and CJ Spiller were, rather than, Travis Etienne and the backup by committee approach that happened under Etienne.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that here's how I look at it, Bill. Who are your two best offensive weapons? Who do you think? I think it's Will Shipley and Phil Mafah.
Yep.
Then they need, if it's two tight ends, then the two tight ends need to be on the field. These guys need to be on the field together. And you and I saw this not last year, but remember 2 years ago at the end of that year, right, where they went to running backs, and it just felt like that entire first half of that season was a slog offensively, and they couldn't get going. They just struggled. And then Tony Elliott went with the two-back offense. They did it against South Carolina. They did it in a bowl game. They did another game, and it felt like it unlocked something.
Right.
And when these two guys are on the field together, if you're a defense, how do you game plan for both of them on the field? Now, you don't want them to get hurt, right? You can't overuse them, and that's why Dominic Thomas probably needs to play some more. Keith Adams needs to play some more, and build up the young guys as well. And just like what we've talked about with offensive line, what we've talked about with receivers, for the longest time, Clemson talked a lot about how many guys played. And that hasn't been the case as much on offense the last couple of years. But I'm with you. Phil Mafah needs more carries. And if that means you cut Wills down a little bit to keep him healthy, or he's catching the ball out of the backfield a little bit more, I'm okay with it. I'm perfectly okay with that. But those are your two best offensive weapons. Unless one of these receivers or Jake Brenningstool steps up and just blows us away this year, then those guys they've got to touch the ball, and they got to be on the field together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that's going to happen as much this year as it did the end of that season 2 years ago, because Uiagalelei was such a maybe plotting is too strong a word, but I mean, he was not much of a running threat like we were used to seeing with Trevor Lawrence, with Kelly Bryant, with Deshaun Watson. Like, he didn't have that burst. He knew how to pick a spot, get a couple tough yards out of it, a little bit slippery in the short term, but he wasn't going to be a breakaway threat. And so teams were keying on Shipley, keying on the running back, whoever it was on the field. And all of a sudden you need, some way to make a team pay if they key too much on your main running back, or to take away that ability to key on one guy. I think it was missing last year. I think it would have helped last year. And I think you absolutely need to get more Phil Mafah to keep Will Shipley fresh, also to develop Mafah. And, I don't want to just say out of fairness. I mean, your number one is your number one. Don't get me wrong. And if Shipley is the true number one, he's going to get a few more carries. Let's talk a little bit about quarterback, though, because Cade Klubnik is a more capable runner. He is an upgrade in the running game. Let's also reconsider, though, that there is a steep drop off to the number 2, Hunter Helms, who I'm a fan of. Don't get me wrong. I like what he can do. I mean, but he's on that sort of Nick Schuessler level where, you're confident he can, get in a game and manage a team to victory. I don't know that he's Chase Bryce. I don't know that he was last year's Cade Klubnik, and there were some ugly moments sometimes when Klubnik came in last year. So you do want to manage that steep drop off, and maybe one way to do that is with the two-back set. But let's talk about Klubnik throwing the ball. We know what he can do running. We may not want to see him running as much as Max Duggan ran last year for TCU under Garrett Riley, the new offensive coordinator here at Clemson. What does Klubnik need to do to be more consistent? Is it mental? Is it physical dialing in? Is it pairing up with the receivers? Where do you think the biggest need is for him?
Yeah, I think it's mental. I do. And look, I think does he have the biggest arm in the world? No. Does Dugan have the biggest arm in the world? No. I mean,
Right.
it's not about the biggest arm in the world. Bill, we see this all the time in the NFL draft. Oh, he's got a cannon. He could throw it 80 yards. And then these guys get in the NFL and they cannot play because they don't have the mental makeup that it takes to play that position. And you have to be able to be a couple of steps ahead. And if you are a couple of steps ahead, then when you do throw the ball early enough, you can make all the throws because guys are open and you're not throwing it into as tight a window. So I think it absolutely is mental. Davis Swinney has said that Cade has gotten bigger. He's gotten more physical. He's gotten stronger. All that stuff's important. But I think he had everything you want from a quarterback who can win a lot of games. Deshaun Watson didn't have the biggest arm in the world, right? Kelly Bryant didn't have a huge arm. Taj Boyd, good enough arm, didn't have a huge arm. Now, Trevor Lawrence can throw it 80 or whatever you want to do, but those guys learn the offense. They fit into the offense, and they were ahead of the game, a couple of steps, ahead of everybody else. So I think that's what it is. I think the work ethic is there. I don't think that's a problem. I think the leadership is there. I think the want to is there. I think his relationship with the receivers, we've heard him and Adam Randall talk about being roommates and how that relationship has built, just hearing what we've heard about the summer workouts with Cade and the receivers and the running backs, all of that stuff's there. I think it's just the mental part of getting out there and doing it, and I think he's going to be just fine this year.
I do too, and I think he's going to benefit from that system that Garrett Riley is bringing in. Maybe a little unfamiliarity at first, but I think by the time he gets to the end of the season, he's not going to feel the pressure to have to do too much. He's not going to feel the pressure to have to be Brett Favre or Patrick Mahomes inventing on the fly all the time. He should be comfortable by then and able to exploit what the system enables him to do in a I guess I'll say attack mode, but I don't want it to sound reckless like attack mode. I think they want to dictate terms to the defense and make things happen that way. I think you look right now at Klubnik versus Jordan Travis or Klubnik versus Riley Leonard. It's easy to say and fair to say that Leonard or Travis is the better quarterback going into those matchups. If you want to say that Duke or FSU has the advantage there, that's fine. What you can't have is that that's still happening. It's not at least a toss-up by the time he faces Sam Hartman, who we talked about in the last episode. By the time he faces Drake May and Spencer Rattler at the end of the season. Right. And so let's get into those two games and those two opponents, and let's start with North Carolina. They do have Drake May back. What a talent. He's going to be motivated, as we've talked about, after he had performed poorly in the ACC championship game. The defense really had a good night, took it to the Tar Heels, May included. But they lose Phil Longo, which makes my Wisconsin friends very happy up there in Milwaukee and Sheboygan areas, right? Obviously, all over Madison, I think everyone is glad to have Luke Fickell and Phil Longo. What does that do to North Carolina? Turn into Chip Lindsey, who is not that same spotlight kind of guy, and with a lot of pressure on, because I'm not sure the defense is going to step up a ton this year either.
They got to play defense at some point. They have to try to play some defense at some point. They have not done that since Mac Brown returned, which is a shock because he's always had overall good teams, right? Even those Texas teams with Vince Young, as dynamic as they were offensively, they were good enough defensively to get the job done.
Oh, yeah. Will Muschamp, Manny Diaz.
Right, exactly. The UNC defenses have been atrocious. And that's a shock to me. I just really am surprised that that's the case. The Longo departure, I think, is one of the biggest ones in college football because we saw what he helped Drake May become. Now, what do they become? Is a lot like Clemson, a lot of uncertainty with what they'll be offensively. Will they keep, we'll see the scheme and all that stuff, and we'll find out, starting this weekend. I know we're talking South Carolina and North Carolina. They play each other. Saturday night. So that's going to be really interesting. But UNC is, to me, is the biggest question mark in the conference.
Yeah.
Because they've got the best quarterback, supposedly. A lot of people think he's the number one pick in the draft, locked down right now. And we know how that works out 9 months out every year. But
Number one, Trevor Lawrence.
Trevor Lawrence, right. But how many games can you win if you don't play any defense?
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. I mean, USC's in the playoff last year if they play any defense. The Southern Cal, sorry.
Southern Cal, yes.
Is in the
USC. You got it right.
Right, exactly. But I'm really, like, I think I know what Florida State is. I know what Miami is. I think I know what Clemson is. I think I know what Notre Dame is. I know they're not in the ACC, but a lot of teams play them. I have no idea what North Carolina is because of their defense. I know what their quarterback is. I know how good he is. He's outstanding. But I have no idea what they are defensively.
Yep. And you can say much the same for the Gamecocks, that team down I-26, as I like to call them. Spencer Rattler is back. Shane Beamer is back. He's probably got his, Believe sign, taped up over the office. But new offensive coordinator, Dow Loggins, I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. A lot of transfers out, some of whom we will see in week 4 against Florida State because they went to Tallahassee. A lot of other guys went to other places. Question marks about South Carolina, maybe more so than North Carolina, and yet projected kind of high in the SEC East. And you just wonder, the national media doesn't always pay attention to the details with Clemson. Are they paying attention to the details with the Gamecocks? I suspect not.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the SEC East, to be honest, other than Georgia. Tennessee is really good, I think. Other than Georgia and Tennessee, what are those teams?
Yeah.
They're not very good. I mean, Florida's not good, and it's going to take them a while. Kentucky's okay. Missouri, and Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt. I watched Vanderbilt struggle against Hawaii on Saturday, and it was ugly. So I think a lot of that might have a play into where you rank South Carolina in the East. I think South Carolina could finish 3rd or 4th in the East. But I think a lot like Drake May, there is a lot on Spencer Rattler's shoulders. A lot. Because I don't know how good they are defensively. I don't know how I think he's going to throw the ball a lot. I don't know that they can run it. I mean, and they beat Clemson last year. So, if you're a Clemson fan, you can't really take shots at South Carolina right now because they won the game. But that certainly felt like Clemson gave that one away a couple of times throughout that game. But South Carolina won it. You got to give them credit. They hung around. They won the game. But there's a lot on Spencer Rattler's shoulders this year, and we'll see if he's up to it. Because, they got to play Georgia. They play Clemson. They play Tennessee. Now, and they beat 2 of those 3 last year. Will they do that again this year? We'll find out. But there's a lot riding on Spencer's shoulder. And I think he's a good player. He played well last year. Played really well in Death Valley. But can he do that again this year? And I liked the Shane Beamer hire when it was made. I thought he was the exact kind of coach that they needed. And he's done pretty well early in his tenure. Can they continue that momentum that they got at the end of last year is going to be really, really interesting to see. That UNC South Carolina game Saturday is very intriguing for me to watch Saturday night.
I think both teams are going to come in with a heavy edge and a big chip on their shoulder, and Clemson looking for payback. And I think South Carolina is going to be, quite frankly, looking to salvage a season. Maybe a bowl berth will be on the line at that point, or maybe a much better bowl berth. We'll see what they're playing for at that point. Well, we have got to run. We will be back at you with Duke coming soon. We may or may not talk realignment after this. We may have already talked about it before this. Find our archive of episodes at clemsonkickoff.com. You can figure out what we've been up to. Catch us on social media. Just search at Clemson Kickoff, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Facebook. And until the next episode, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.